That Triathlon Show 267. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and I hope that 2021 is off to a great start for you. Today's guest on the podcast is Robert Gorgos, who is the team nutritionist of Bora-Hansgrohe Cycling Team, which is a world tour level team based in Germany. In this interview, Robert discusses his role and responsibilities as the team nutritionist and generally speaking how cyclists at the highest level approach nutrition in racing, training and in their day-to-day. One thing that I want to mention about this interview is that at the time of us conducting the interview, Robert wasn't sure if he was actually allowed to say which team he worked for. So when we talk in the interview, we don't actually mention Bora-Hansgrohe, but beat around the bush a bit, to be frank. And only after the interview was done could Robert confirm to me that it was okay to mention the team name as well, which I personally think is very important to get some more context. So I'm happy with that. But anyway, if it sounds a bit secretive at times in the interview, this is the reason why. And now after the fact, we have confirmed that it is no issue at all to mention Bora-Hansgrohe as the team that Robert is working for. But before we get into the interview, big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. And since today's topic is around World Tour cycling teams, Precision Hydration is sponsoring Team Sunweb, who had great success in 2020 when the racing season finally started again after the break due to the pandemic, and achieved many great performances as a team and as individuals. Precision Hydration's electrolytes can be matched to your individual sweat sodium concentration, and you can get a good estimate for how much sodium you lose in your sweat by getting a free hydration plan on precisionhydration.com, which is very easy. You will just answer 10 questions that will take you a few minutes, and that will give you a validated estimate for how much sodium you lose so that you can then get the right electrolyte strength to use in your training and racing. You can get 15% off your Precision Hydration order with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15. And thank you to Roka that you can find on roka.com. We're in a new year with new opportunities, and hopefully that includes many more opportunities than the previous year to do some racing when the racing season rolls around. And with that in mind, if you are looking for an upgrade in your racing gear department, things like wetsuits, dry suits, swim skins, goggles, sunglasses, then Roka is absolutely the place to go. For example, a tri-suit and wetsuit combo is absolutely perfect because both of those product lines have Roka's patented arms up technology so that you will swim with absolutely minimal shoulder mobility restriction, and you can benefit from the great buoyancy profiles of Roka's wetsuits and as well as the great aerodynamics of their tri-suits on the bike. You can get 20% off your entire Roka order with the promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the interview with Robert Gorgos. Welcome to That Triathlon Show, Robert. How are you doing today?
I'm pretty well. Weather is nice. I went on a short morning run already, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, a morning run sounds good. I'm waiting to do my brick workout later today, so excited for that. Before we get into the main questions we have today, let's start by you introducing yourself to the audience. Who are you, and what's your background and your current roles and line of work?
Yeah, my name is Robert Gorgos. I'm from Bavaria in Germany. I'm a nutritionist with a diploma degree at the Technical University of Munich. I'm 44 years old. I'm a cyclist myself. I still do mountain bike and cyclocross racing. And I work for a professional bike team since 4 years, and also since 4 years for a Bundesliga soccer team. I also coach some athletes concerning nutrition, but also concerning training mostly mountain bikers, cyclists, and also one triathlete, some backcountry skiers, runners. So this is my current role. I'm self-employed, and I always try to find new ways to coach and teach nutrition and training to athletes.
Yeah. So the context in which you were introduced to me was through your work with a World Tour cycling team. So I'm probably going to answer most of the questions today from that specific context within your work within the cycling world, and specifically professional cycling at the World Tour level. But with that said, you have a lot of things going on. So this next question, maybe you can answer in different ways, but what does a typical workday look like for you when working with the cycling team?
Yeah, it's pretty different. It depends on, like you said, it's a different roles and different periods. Right now, there's still racing going on in professional cycling. Right now, we have 3 races parallelly running. We have the Giro in the last week. We have the Vuelta that starts today, and we have still one race in Belgium that is tomorrow. And all those races are accompanied by a chef from our team. One chef at the Giro cooks in the kitchen truck. One chef cooks in a kind of random kitchen in Spain, because the regulations concerning COVID are very strict. And one chef is in Belgium. So I kind of coach those chefs and tell them what to cook. We measure the amounts. We think what is available. We think what makes sense concerning weather, concerning the race itself, concerning the riders that are running or doing the race. Second thing is the coaching group. I'm in contact with the coaching group. So whenever there's something special with a particular rider that has problems, that is gaining or losing weight, that doesn't have enough energy in the race, we just talk and try to find a solution, for example, concerning race nutrition, race feeding, after race feeding. Yeah. And the third role is at the moment also concerning next year. We try to find optimization for all kind of things concerning nutrition, and we have some ideas for next season already. Maybe it's a little bit different in a training camp. In a training camp, I actually accompany the riders on the rides, because I'm still myself a cyclist, and it's a perfect way to talk to the riders on the bike. They kind of loosen up and they talk about nutrition, about training, about their concerns, and if they have questions. And so that's a good thing. And sometimes in the evenings we have meetings. We present new ideas. We show them what would be perfect in a training situation, for example, for an easy ride, for an intensity ride, all these kind of things. During a stage race, it's all kind of things. It's helping the cook or the chef in the kitchen itself. I also work in the kitchen. I talk to the riders. I talk to the physios, what to prepare for the race. We make a feeding plan for the race. But I'm also a helper. Means that I just feed on the race course with bottles or food. So it's all kind of things what needs to be done.
All right, perfect. And during the base training phase, when we get into sort of December, January, but outside of training camps, do you have any particular like typical work day then, or what is your role within the team then?
Yeah, that's a phase when we make orders. We have a big service course where we stock race food, stock normal food, and we try to optimize everything concerning those things. So I need to it's more kind of logistics. So we fix the kitchen truck. We try to get new products from our sponsors, try them out. We negotiate with the sponsors. I make suggestions what kind of products we might need. Um, it's a phase when we have lots of calls within the coaching group and try to optimize all kind of things concerning training and nutrition. Yeah.
And I'm sure that in your general day-to-day, you also need to stay on top of what the latest nutrition science that's coming out says. So how do you do that? Do you have any particular habits or routines around staying on top of these things?
Yeah, I always reserve about, it depends, maybe half an hour to 2 hours in the morning, sometimes or most of the times before breakfast or after a morning run or something, just to browse and look at some studies and read emails and read newspapers or magazines and try to get the actual new topics concerning nutrition. Or I talk to the trainers, or a trainer calls me and we discuss. Yeah, that's kind of a routine.
All right, perfect. You mentioned having been with the team for 4 years, you said?
Yeah.
What are some things that have changed in regard to nutrition throughout your time there as a direct or indirect result of your work?
I think it hasn't changed that much, but maybe one topic that is getting more and more important and also interesting, and that we really try to feed the kind of maximum amount of carbohydrates per hour during the races. And normally we aimed for around, let's say, 60 to 80 grams per hour, and now we try to feed a little bit more. Other teams go
are you aiming for 90 grams per hour, or are you aiming for even more than that?
Yeah, we aim around for 80 to 90 grams per hour. And other teams aim even higher, but this for sure needs some training, like training of the gut. And this will be a project for next year to find out what is the highest possible amount of carbohydrates that are digestible in a race situation per rider per hour. I think this is maybe a new approach, and I think this is really important, especially for the heavier riders, for the sprinters in a stage race, for example. It's about winning or losing a race. So I would say this is a good goal, and we, from the beginning on, we try to go pretty high, but maybe it's possible to go even higher. Maybe this is the biggest change. And the second thing that is probably new or will be new, that we will try to even more in detail analyze the data and see how much energy concerning carbs and fats they burn during training and racing, and try to adapt the food exactly to that. So this will be a new way of like individualizing nutrition. So this is a big goal, and we will have to see how we can make this this okay for the riders, because that's a big thing. It's not for everyone, and we have to talk a lot to the riders also from a psychological side.
What are the main challenges of that tracking and matching the exact energy and macronutrient needs?
It's actually not that big of a challenge. I mean, you have in cycling, it's pretty easy. You have the power meter data with some other data from the riders that we have. You can exactly analyze the amounts of amount of energy burned and the amounts of carbs and fats, and then you have to adjust that in nutrition. It's not that hard. I think the harder part is like to to make the whole team believe in this and make the whole team also supporting this idea.
Yeah. If we talk a little bit about the day-to-day nutrition, so now we're talking about in training periods, not during stage races or the like. Can you talk a little bit more about generally about the energy demands and the frequency of food intake and so on of these World Tour cyclists that you're working with?
Yeah, I don't think it's the same for everyone, but meaning meal frequency and meal choice. But I would say a normal training day in the base period would be between 3 and 6 hours. And if you count, also depending on the intensity of the ride, if you count in between 500 and 800 calories per hour, so you get a good idea of what the turnover for the day would be. So, for example, if a rider does 4 hours with some intensity, he would probably have energy demand in between 4.5 and 5,000 calories for that day, because he burns around 2,000 without in his normal life, and around 2.5 to 3,000 in the training itself. So he would probably have breakfast, also depending on the training goal. That could be like porridge with some nuts, maybe with fruit, maybe an omelette, maybe 1 or 2 slices of bread. Also individually, like with maybe some jam or some ham or something like this, maybe an avocado. We would try to make the rider eat properly during training, and this is also something that is pretty outstanding in professional cycling. They really feed well during training, maybe opposite to like an amateur rider that always try to train hungry. I have a feeling. So they really fuel properly during the ride. And then depending on the schedule, have maybe a recovery shake or something after the ride, a smaller lunch, maybe a salad and some pasta or so, and a normal dinner consisting of vegetables, some meat or fish, and rice or potatoes, maybe a small dessert. Pretty standard, I would say, but still focusing on real food, on good quality food, maybe if possible organic food. Not so much from a restaurant, but cooked at home and with good quality ingredients. I think this is what we really push in the riders.
Yeah, just well balanced, a well balanced diet overall. It sounds like.
Yeah.
In the training itself, when you say that they're really good at fueling, would that mean that they're basically trying to fuel with as much as their race fueling plan? So 80 to 90 grams per hour, or is it a bit less depending on the workout?
Yeah.
And how do they fuel? Is it always with similar, like with gels or sports drinks or things they will be using in the race, or in normal training rides, will they also use things like bananas or more sort of whole food, so to say, for their fueling?
Yeah, exactly. Normally, it's also it is very dependent on the training intensity, and for sure, only a few rides in a training period are aimed at 80 to 90 grams per hour of carbohydrates, and most are more in the region, I would say, of 40 to 60 grams, especially the base endurance training. And they would fuel with normal food, like some like to make kind of porridge cake, some like rice cakes or normal bars, or even a sandwich, bananas, a lower carbohydrate drink. Some would stop at a bakery and buy something there. Pretty normal, I would say.
All right. And in the nutrition, do you have any sort of macronutrient distribution goals or guidelines for how they fuel during this training period?
Yes, I would say we aim for a higher carbohydrate diet. Also in the base training period, we try to just manage the training load. And for a special training load, they need a special or a distinctive amount of carbohydrates, and this is what we try to achieve. And if they want, or if the goal is to lose weight, for example, it's not by reducing carbohydrate, but just by reducing energy density. We have some rides that are intended to be like train low rides for some athletes, and those can be specially like modified concerning carbohydrate amounts at certain times, but this is not like the standard procedure. It would be maybe once in a week or once in 2 weeks, or controlled in a training camp. But generally, it's a pretty. I don't know if you can say standard, but you would say like a higher carbohydrate diet the whole year.
Roughly, do you have grams per kilo body weight you're aiming for, or a percentage distribution, like you're getting 65% carbohydrate, or any sort of quantitative data around that?
Yeah. I would say we are in the range of around 55 to 65% carbohydrate. Maybe in a super long stage, it gets even a little bit higher because they feed a lot during the race, and this feeding is normally pretty low in fat, and the rest divides like maybe we also, depending on the energy demand, it's probably around 15, maybe 1 or 2% higher percent of protein, and the leftover is fat. Maybe in the base training period, it's a little bit higher in fat and a little bit lower in carbohydrate, but not that much.
And you mentioned there with weight or body composition goals that you might reduce energy density. Can you explain what that means specifically?
Yeah, energy density is a measurement that describes the amount of kilocalories per 100 gram of food. Like, for example, chocolate has a pretty high energy density. It has 500 something calories of per 100 gram of product. So the energy density is 5 or 5.5 or 5.8. And the energy density of, for example, vegetables is pretty low because it's only 20 calories per 100 gram. So the energy density is 0.2. And if the goal is to feel satisfied and feel full and ingest a certain amount of food volume, because this is what actually your gut like realizes, then a good idea is to think about the energy density of food. So the higher the water content of a food, the lower normally the energy density. So if you focus on, let's say, vegetables, fruit, potatoes, rice, good low-fat meat or fish, beans, lentils. These are all good examples for food that are good nutrient, that have a good nutrient value, but still are pretty low in energy density. And this is kind of the way to go to feel full, satisfied, have enough nutrients, and don't overdo the energy intake.
Perfect. And when you have this, like you're trying to lose body weight, are there any other considerations that you take? For example, roughly how much of a bigger caloric deficit would you aim for? And also, would you have any changes in the macronutrients, like increasing protein intake or anything like that?
Yeah, it also depends on the rider, on the type of muscles and the personal preferences. But a good idea is not to go over 10 or 15% of deficit per day. So, for example, if he needs or he burns, let's say, 5,000 calories, it would not be a good idea to go below 4,002 or 4,300 calories. And if you manage to be in this slight energy deficit, you can lose some body fat. Maybe with a focus on enough protein in the diet, you can also manage to not lose muscle. And still your body doesn't adapt concerning the thyroid or the metabolism, because it doesn't really recognize a huge energy deficit. If you would go, like, let's say, to 3,000 or 2,500 calories, your body would, maybe in an amount of weeks, it also depends on the specific metabolism of the rider, would adapt and would slow down the metabolism, would also like burn some muscle, and if in worst case burn some immune proteins, and would actually suffer, and this would not be the right way. So a slight energy deficit, good energy, good nutrient quality, enough proteins, let's say in the range of between 1.7 and maybe 2 grams per kilograms body weight, would be the way to go, I think.
Yeah. And do you have a guideline for how much weight it is reasonable to lose, for example, per week in a healthy and sustainable way?
Would probably be also depending on the pre-situation, or the amount of body fat to be lost. I would say it would be maximum half a kilo of body fat per week.
Yeah. What would be a typical body fat percentage of the World Tour riders?
That's for sure under 10%. And in some riders is in the range of 5%. So somewhere in that range.
Right. Do your riders do any tracking and monitoring themselves of, for example, of course, as you mentioned, we have power meters, so it's very easy to track expenditure in that way.
Yeah.
Well, one question in terms of expenditure, how do you measure the basal metabolic rate of the riders? Do you do that, or do you just estimate it? And then the second question is, do your riders actually track what they're eating and measure it and upload it somewhere, or report to you? How does that work?
Yeah, it is of course possible to measure the basic metabolic rate, but it's also a little bit different from day to day, and so we do not measure that particularly. It's more of an estimation, and we know our riders pretty well. Most riders are in the team for longer than 1 year, so we can estimate that pretty exactly. And the tracking also is individually. So some riders do track, most riders don't. I think they get a pretty good feeling for. We have some rough guidelines what like special or specific amount of carbohydrates look like. We have some kind of let's say learning, or we do some kind of learning how to estimate or pretty exactly estimate how much energy is in a whole meal or in a plate. So some riders do track anyways, but most riders don't.
Yeah. What about during the stage races? We talked a little bit about that, but maybe you can go into a little bit more of what it looks like, for example, with the meals surrounding the race itself. What kind of breakfast are the riders having before the races? When are they having it, and so on? And also, of course, how do they then refuel after the race?
Yeah. So this is, I would say, is pretty standard. We try to feed the riders 3 hours before the start. So if the start is at 12 o'clock, breakfast normally is between, let's say, 8:30 and 9:30. It always is porridge, is every day, just plain porridge, maybe with some spices. Then we have some kind of smoothie, we have a fruit plate, we have always something with eggs. Some riders like omelets, other like cooked eggs or scrambled eggs. We always serve some kind of good quality bread with some cheese or ham, with organic jam and honey, nut butters. Some riders like to eat rice or pasta for breakfast, mostly plain with just olive oil and salt, maybe a little bit of Parmesan cheese, and of course coffee. Some riders drink tea, especially in the cold races, things like ginger tea or something like this. That's a pretty standard breakfast. Sometimes avocado, some nuts, dried fruit. Just pretty, I would say, food that you can buy anywhere in the world. Then during the race, also depending on the stage itself and on the profile, it's a mixture of liquid carbohydrates and solid carbohydrates. So sport drinks and rice cakes, bars, gels. After the ride, it's a recovery shake, and later in the team bus, some kind of starchy food like rice or pasta or potatoes with some pesto and maybe a little bit of cheese, maybe some fruit. And for dinner, it also depends on the season. It depends on the weather. It's maybe a small salad or a smoothie, some kind of vegetable soup, always some kind of fish or meat with vegetables and mostly potatoes, and of course pasta or rice with different sauces and maybe a small dessert. Then we have a food room where the rider can, if he's still hungry or wants to eat later or earlier, he can choose from like just normal snack food like muesli, energy bars, fruit, yogurt, things like that.
And can you go into some of the like typical energy contents of these different meals? Like how much are you aiming to get in for breakfast and for the recovery shake, the team bus food and so on?
Yeah, of course, the biggest meal is breakfast and dinner. I would say it's in between 1,500 and 2,000, maybe sometimes even a little bit more kilocalories. And during the ride, depending on the stage, it's around 300 to 400 calories per hour. After the stage, the recovery shake is also again 300 to 400 calories. And then in the bus, it's somewhere in between, I would say 800 and 1,200 kilocalories.
Breakfast and dinner, just to clarify, each of those is 1,500 to 2,000?
Yeah, each of those,
Yeah. So the total caloric intake for the day would be roughly how much?
Also depending on the length of the stage and the intensity, but would be in the range of 5,000 to 8,000 kilocalories.
All right. And there during the stage race, we already mentioned a little bit, but there the carbohydrate proportion would be slightly higher because you get in a lot during the race. So you were talking about maybe 65% carbohydrates for the day or so?
Yeah.
All right. Then a few other questions. You already mentioned a little bit about how you maybe once per week or every other week do a low glycogen training. A follow-up question on that would be, how do you do that specifically? Do you have an intense session the night before and then you don't eat carbohydrates? Or do you actually actively deplete glycogen stores before that? Or is it just a normal fasted ride? And then how long might that be? And how much, if anything, are you taking in during it?
Yeah, so we normally do not do fasted trainings. It's exactly how you said. You do like a medium intensity ride the day before. You try to not refuel the carbohydrates or just moderately fuel this ride. Try to not have a high carbohydrate meal after the ride or later in the day. And then start with like a low carbohydrate breakfast that is a little bit higher in protein and fat, and go on a really easy ride and ingest like low amounts of carbohydrates, maybe also some kind of slow release carbohydrates during the ride. Sometimes, but that's...
What does a low amount mean? Would it be 30 grams per hour?
Yeah,
even
less, 20 grams per hour, 20 to, in that range, around 20 to 30 grams per hour. And sometimes we also, it is also possible to go like to have some kind of proteins in your bottle, or just eat nuts or something like this. But normally we would do like a lower carbohydrate ingestion from only slow release carbohydrates. And after the ride, you would refuel normally.
And is this something you do very regularly? So
no,
once every week or every other week, or is it just specific periods of the season?
It's just specific periods of the season, and also dependent on the rider and the goals. So
what type of rider would be doing this, and what type of rider would not be doing this?
I mean, you have to always see what is the goal of this. So the goal of this is to improve the fat burning capacity. So if this is the goal, then you could do this, yeah. And especially in the early phase of the season, in the preparation for longer races. Typically, if you have a very small rider and he's unstable with infections and stuff, then you should be careful with this.
How does size play a role in this?
I mean, normally the higher the muscle mass, the more robust the rider is, and normally if more kind of a sprinter builds lactic acid quicker. So if the goal is to improve his aerobic capacity, or his, no, better say, his base capacity, and his lower his lactate building rate, then this could be a way.
Yeah. Let's see here. So another question then. You mentioned that already, that many of these riders, they already like do a lot of things very well. Apparently, that's the sort of what I'm hearing, at least. But are there any common mistakes that you see cyclists at this level might do when it comes to their nutrition?
Yeah, probably mistake number one would be to not fuel enough during a race. For example, for a super easy stage, and not being really hungry or not feeling the desire to ingest a lot of carbohydrates, this could be a problem. And sometimes I'm not a big fan of the combinations they use. For example, for breakfast, what kind of specific food they use, but that's also very individually. But overall, as you said, they're in a pretty good way, and especially in the team, we have a very good system of quality food, timing of food, different types of food. Like it's not the same all the time. So I think they're pretty spoiled, actually.
Well, just out of curiosity, what are some combinations or one combination that you mentioned that you don't like so much that you see them using? Is like Nutella and peanut butter?
No, it's more like it's like really small details. For example, if you have a dinner with a good source of iron, like a steak or so, and after that you eat like yogurt, for example, it's not perfect because the milk protein could interfere with the iron.
Inhibit the iron absorption.
Inhibit the iron absorption. Just like details like this. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. What do you think might be some changes we might see in the next 5 years or so in your team and in general in the pro peloton when it comes to nutrition? What do you think is on the horizon?
I think feeding of carbohydrates will be even higher than this now. So there will be for sure a goal to go to 100 or more grams per hour per rider. I think this will be a change, and more and more teams will have a kitchen truck just to manage the demands of hygiene and quality and timing and amounts of food. I just heard from the Giro that the teams that are not eating in a kitchen truck are really have some concerns concerning the virus now, and this I think will be a big change. I think most most World Tour teams will have a kitchen truck in the future.
When it comes to consuming more carbohydrates during the races, so you said that all this is something that for sure requires some gut training. And we also know about, at least we know some things, but maybe we don't know everything yet about the combination of types of carbohydrates, like glucose and fructose ratios. But what do you think? Is it just a matter of really like training the gut, and you can achieve that, or are there still things other than that maybe science needs to figure out for it to really be realistic for most riders to be able to absorb that amount of carbohydrates?
Yeah, normally your gut is able to digest around 60, maybe maximum 80 grams per hour of one single carbohydrate, so glucose, for example. And with, as you said, with the combination or with the addition of fructose, or maybe even a third or fourth type of carbohydrate, for example, a special fruit or so, it's possible to ingest more than that per hour. But I think it's also individually. Some riders do not have any problems with ingesting that high amount of carbohydrates, even during super high intensity, like in a race. Others do have problems, so it has to be treated individually. But normally, science and also in practice is a combination of different types of carbohydrates that can or make this higher ingestion even or possible at all.
Yeah. Is there some area that you're currently very fascinated by and learning more about within nutrition, and maybe starting to implement more and more?
Yeah, it's probably exactly that one. I think there are some interesting studies that show that the runners or mountain runners ingested 120 grams per hour, and they're generally smaller body type and pretty light, around 60 to 65 kilos, and it is possible. And I think this is a fascinating thing, because we were always thinking that's impossible and will lead to distress in your intestine, but it is actually possible. So this would be around 2 grams per kilogram body weight per hour, and that's really a lot, and it is actually possible. So this is pretty fascinating.
Yes, definitely. And actually, just as a teaser for the listeners, I hope to interview the lead author of that particular study in the coming weeks or so. When it will be released on the podcast, we'll see. But we've been in discussion, and we'll probably do an interview pretty soon. So I'm excited as well to learn more about that.
Yeah.
Now, what about in terms of the amateur cyclists and endurance athletes that you're helping? Just in general, what would be your, let's say, top 3 pieces of advice regarding nutrition for endurance athletes?
Oh, number 1, do not go low carb, because training quality will suffer from it, and the energy demands cannot be matched, or is harder to match, especially, of course, the carbohydrates are missing. So I don't think you have that good of adaptations with low carb, that it would be like reasonable to try it out. So this would be number 1. Number 2 is fuel your rides properly. Most amateur riders do not fuel properly during training, especially with higher intensity rides. So try some rides with, as we said, 80 to maybe 100 grams per hour. On most rides, do around 40 to 60 grams per hour. And number 3 is do not overdo fasted training or train low things, because it has to be really well monitored. And still carbohydrates are it's kind of the same as point number 1. I would not do a lot of experimenting. Find out what works for you and follow that, and do not try new things every other week.
Yeah, and on that last point, I totally agree, by the way, and it's something that we talked about before on the podcast. I just want to remind the listeners that even though there's some really interesting work done in the train low realm, it's still sort of, the jury is still kind of out on it, in my opinion at least, and you'll have a better knowledge of this than I do. But I don't think there's like really a lot of good, if any, good performance evidence yet, even though there's some really, really interesting mechanistical evidence there that could make you take a reasonable guess that if there is good mechanistic adaptations, then yes, at the end of the day, you might get some performance benefits that we haven't yet been able to measure. But the point is that so far it's really not been seen a lot, at least in terms of peer-reviewed studies, that there are direct performance benefits, even though there might be, but we just haven't been able to observe them yet. So it's not it's the icing on the cake. It's not the cake itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Final question before we go into the rapid fire questions would be: do you have any recommendations in terms of books or podcasts or similar other resources that on the topic of nutrition that you think would be good for the listeners of the podcast?
Yeah, there's a good a blog. It's I think it's from Berlin. I'm sorry, I think it's only in German so far. But it's called idubili.de, and it's managed by a German biologist, and he's really looking on metabolism and nutrition and training from a biological perspective, always with studies, and I like that a lot. And he also has a book that is pretty interesting. His name is Chris Michalk. I don't know him personally, but I discovered it this year and I read it frequently. I have his books and I really like those.
All right, great advice. And for the blog, there's always Google Translate, so that's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Now let's go into the rapid fire questions. And the first one here, so take one sentence to answer these questions, no more. And the first one is similar to the last question, but a bit different. This is: what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to endurance sports or nutrition or anything in that realm?
I have one book that accompanied me in the last 15 years. It's called Peak Performance by John Hawley and Louis Burke. I think it's not longer available, but I have it at home.
For some more recent work from them, they have both been guests on the podcast fairly recently, in 2020. So the listeners can go and have a look at that. What's a personal habit that's helped you achieve success?
Listening to my body and not following a training plan like one-to-one.
And finally, who's somebody that you look up to or that has inspired you?
Tim Noakes. I heard him on a nutrition conference in Mallorca. I do not agree with his opinions all the time, but he's a really fascinating scientist.
All right, perfect. And finally, do you have any social media or website presence or anything like that you want to mention so the listeners can follow you and find you?
I'm actually not a social media person at all. So I developed some products that fit to the fueling during training. If you're interested, you can find this under my name. But that's about it. I'm totally not a social media person, and sorry.
Right. Yeah, no problem. That's totally fine. I'll find your website and put it in the show notes with those products.
It's Ministry of Nutrition. Yeah.
Ministry of Nutrition.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much, Robert. It's been really interesting to hear you share your the insights from the pro peloton and how nutrition works there. So much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
I hope that you enjoyed that interview. And as always, you can find the show notes on scientifictriathlon.com, where we'll have linked to related episodes, including interviews with John Hawley, Louise Burke, and a research paper on the mountain marathon runners that consumed 120 grams per hour of carbohydrate during a race. And interestingly, I have interviewed the main author behind that paper, and that episode should be released in 2 weeks' time, I believe. But before that, on Thursday, we have another Q&A coming out as usual. And on Monday, I interview Coach Wolfram Bott, who now works in a high-performance development center in Germany, but is also well known for working with athletes like Niels Fromhold and the Raylert brothers in long-distance triathlon. So plenty of interesting discussion topics with him next week. Make sure that you subscribe to the podcast so that you automatically get all the new episodes as they come out. And if you are looking for training plans or coaching services, do go to scientifictriathlon.com and check them out. We have something to offer for everybody, I believe, and people are very, very happy with these products and services. So I think that you will be too. Finally, big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Go and get a free hydration plan and an estimate for how much you sweat, and order electrolyte products to use in training and racing for 15% off with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15. And thank you to Roka, that you can find on roka.com. Check out their wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses, and get 20% off your entire order with the promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.